When he ignores you, your heart tightens and your mind floods with assumptions, while silence screams louder than any words. But what if this distance is actually a quiet confession of love? What appears as indifference might conceal a deep psychological struggle he himself does not understand. In this video, we will explain why a man who loves can paradoxically withdraw and ignore you. We will explore the unconscious forces driving him, the feminine projections he carries, and the visceral fear of being consumed by what he desires most. Carl Jung's analytical psychology will guide us in understanding how love awakens not only light, but also shadow. If you've ever wondered why he stays silent, get ready. The answers lie deeper within him and you than you might imagine. Leave a comment with the phrase, "I deserve conscious love." Analytical psychology offers a powerful key to comprehending contradictory behavior, especially in romantic relationships. When a man who loves distances himself or ignores you, it is often not a sign of indifference, but an unconscious reaction to internal forces beyond his control. Jung speaks of projection, the mechanism by which we project parts of ourselves we haven't yet acknowledged onto another. When a man falls in love, he often projects his anima, the feminine archetype of his psyche, onto the woman. She becomes the unconscious embodiment of all he seeks, fears, and wishes to integrate. This process can be overwhelming. When faced with his shadow, his fears, traumas, and insecurities, he may retreat. True love activates the path of individuation, requiring confrontation with the unconscious and integration of both light and rejected parts of the self. In this context, ignoring becomes a defense mechanism, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares deeply and doesn't know how to handle the transformation this love demands. Distance often reflects a conflict between the desire to unite with another and the fear of losing one's identity. Instead of interpreting silence as rejection, it is essential to see it as a possible sign that the relationship has touched deep layers. The integration of a man's anima and a woman's shadow are important steps toward a genuine, not idealized encounter. If he loves you but ignores you, perhaps he faces the greatest challenge of his psychological journey, loving without losing himself. Love, especially the kind that touches the soul's depths, is not just an experience of joy and connection. It is also an intense mirror reflecting our hidden parts. Carl Jung warns that everything in our unconscious eventually manifests in the external world, especially in our closest relationships. When a man truly loves, this feeling can awaken not only his desires and dreams, but also his deepest wounds, traumas, and fears. This is his shadow. According to Jung, the shadow contains everything suppressed or rejected throughout life, impulses, emotions, and aspects of the self that don't fit the ideal self-image and are pushed into the unconscious. When this man meets a woman who awakens genuine feelings in him, he unconsciously begins projecting both his light and dark sides onto her. This is a natural psychic process, but understanding and integrating it requires maturity. That's why, more often than not, instead of growing closer, he withdraws. True love demands not only surrender, but also profound transformation, as if his soul knows that to love fully, he must confront all he has avoided. The fear of losing himself in another, losing control, or relinquishing lifelong defenses becomes stronger than the desire to connect, causing him to pull away. The impulse to ignore, isolate, or act coldly can be an unconscious attempt to preserve a fragmented identity he has built. When love activates the shadow, the man stands before an inner abyss. He must choose between facing his wounds or clinging to the safety of the familiar. Many, not emotionally ready for this confrontation, ultimately choose to flee. In this context, silence, absence of contact, and apparent indifference are not necessarily signs of lack of love. On the contrary, they may indicate that this feeling has awakened something so deep that he still does not know how to cope with it. Though painful for the one receiving it, this movement is also a call for each person to look within and understand what this connection reflects. For the woman feeling ignored, especially if she also projects her idealizations and unresolved needs onto him, this can be even harder. But understanding this process can change her perspective. When she realizes his withdrawal might result from an inner confrontation with his own shadow, she stops personalizing abandonment and starts seeing the psychological dynamics behind his behavior. It is important to remember that true love is a path of individuation, inviting both partners to become more authentic versions of themselves. If the connection is deep, it inevitably awakens childhood wounds, inherited behavior patterns, and survival defenses. And this is necessary because without crisis, there is no transformation. So when he ignores you after showing love, He might be inwardly struggling with the fear of losing himself in you, of dissolving in a betrayal that demands more than he can offer right now. What he truly fears is not the relationship itself, but what it awakens within him, the need for change, healing, and integrating his own shadow. This is the beauty and pain of love touching the soul. It comes not only to unite, but also to reveal, and we are not always ready to see what will be revealed. But by understanding the psychological nature of this behavior, you gain power, not the power to control another, but the power to choose how to position yourself in the face of pain with awareness, compassion, and courage. Jung described the anima as the feminine archetype present in a man's psyche, an inner image shaping his perception and attitude toward women. This figure, formed from emotional experiences with female figures in childhood, especially the mother, represents much more than idealization. It is a gateway to the wholeness of the male psyche. However, when a man is unaware of his anima, he projects it onto the women he relates to, creating connections marked by illusions, expectations, and deep disappointments. When a man loves you yet distances himself, he often struggles with this projection. You become the embodiment of all that is mysterious, sensitive, and emotional, everything he was never encouraged to recognize or develop within himself. The woman becomes a mirror of his most fragile and suppressed parts. He feels attraction and simultaneously threat. Ultimately, this contact with his inner feminine can overwhelm his masculinized ego, taught to value control, reason, and emotional distance as strength. The anima is not merely a romantic or idealized image. She carries emotional chaos, desire for union, intuition, and sensitivity, forces that, if misunderstood, provoke confusion and fear. Thus, the love he feels for you can become a gateway that activates this forgotten part of his psyche and triggers an inner crisis. When he looks at you, he sees not only you, but everything he desires, fears, and never knew how to name. This projection can be enchanting at first. He places you on a pedestal, seeing you as unique, ideal, almost magical. But as shared life reveals your humanity, the projection dissolves and disappointment follows. Not because you changed, but because you were never what he projected onto you. What he loved was an inner image that needed reintegration inside him, not something to find outside. When he realizes this, he experiences an emotional collapse. The fantasy shatters, bringing fear, discomfort, and withdrawal. The wounded masculine aspect is the one disconnected from sensitivity, forced to swallow tears, taught that vulnerability is weakness. By projecting the anima onto a woman, this man approaches the most sacred part of his psyche, yet lacks the emotional tools to handle it. It's like opening a door to a universe he has never explored, and that universe screams. He feels small, lost, confused, and so he runs away. The pain of his leaving is immense for the one who stays, but his pain is real, silently hidden. It is the emptiness of not knowing who he is, not knowing his feelings, and being unable to maintain a true connection with something beyond logic. He truly loves you but fears you, not for who you are but for what you represent, a call to transformation. It is important to acknowledge this dynamic is not your fault. You did not cause his crisis, but you can choose what to do with this awareness. Instead of trying to save, rescue, or convince him to return, perhaps the most powerful act is to give him the time he needs to navigate his path. Meanwhile, you can reflect on your own projections. What did you expect from him? What role did he play in your psyche? Love is not just a meeting of bodies, it is a reflection of souls. Understanding the anima and its role in male psychology allows us to see withdrawal not as rejection, but as a moment of inner crisis, a call for each person to return to themselves, reintegrate lost parts, and perhaps one day meet again, not as projections or myths, but as whole human beings. When a man loves yet still ignores you, his actions may seem absurd. But from the perspective of Jungian psychology, ignoring is not simply neglect or indifference. It is often a psychic defense against what he still cannot integrate within himself. To understand this behavior, one must look deeper and recognize unconscious mechanisms operating in the male psyche when facing the impact of a deep connection. True love transforms. It breaks down lifelong inner structures often based on emotional suppression, rigid masculinity patterns, and fear of surrender and vulnerability. When a man finds himself in a relationship demanding emotional presence, vulnerability, and authenticity, his inner system may react with resistance. Ignoring in this context is not just escape. It is an unconscious attempt to maintain control over an internal reality that begins to collapse. Jung shows that the unconscious is dynamic, and when unintegrated, it manifests through symptoms, conflicting attitudes, and defensive behaviors. Withdrawal, silence, sudden coldness all reflect this inner conflict. He does not know how to express what he feels because he has not yet learned to fully feel. For many men, the emotional language was muted early on. So, when love knocks at the door, bringing the need for sincere connection, he shuts down. His defense is silence. His strategy is flight. Such men often identify throughout life with the archetype of the rational, strong hero. Showing vulnerability threatens their sense of identity. He fears losing himself in the relationship, fears being overwhelmed by feelings he cannot name, and fears dependence on something he cannot control. That is why he ignores you, even while loving you. This emotional ignoring is also fueled by the shadow side Jung describes as the hidden part of the personality. Everything rejected, judged, or simply unaccepted by consciousness, which unexpectedly emerges in crises. The masculine shadow may contain fears of abandonment, insecurity, suppressed anger, neediness, jealousy, and fragility. When true love activates these emotions, he confronts parts of himself he does not recognize. Silence becomes a way to avoid destruction. On the other hand, the act of ignoring can also have symbolic meaning. In some archetypal traditions, the hero must pass through desertion, exile, or a period of distancing before he can rediscover himself. In this sense, withdrawal can be an unconscious inward movement, a way to reorganize the inner world to understand what is happening and name what is felt. But when this process remains unconscious, he does not know how to express it, and the woman feels only abandonment. Here, many relationships break down. The woman experiences the pain of silence as a reflection of her own inadequacy, when in fact, she has entered a process belonging more to him than to her. Recognizing this, she can break the cycle of pain and reaction. Instead of desperately seeking answers or begging for attention, she turns inward and reflects on what this behavior awakens in her. The key here is awareness. Jung said everything unconscious manifests in life as fate. If he does not understand why he withdraws, ignores, or cannot hold the love he feels, he will continue repeating this pattern in all his relationships. And if the woman also fails to understand its meaning, she risks harming herself trying to fix another. Ignoring in this context is a cry from the unconscious, a request for time, space, and silence so that something inside can reorganize. It is not easy for those who feel, wait, and love. But understanding this behavior as part of a deeper dynamic can turn pain into wisdom. Most importantly, it can allow love, even if not reciprocated in the expected way, to serve as a mirror for growth for both. Facing the silence of a man who loves but distances himself, a woman often finds herself caught in an emotional whirlpool of doubt, rejection, insecurity, anger, and need. Yet in this pain lies a hidden invitation, a call to consciousness. Jung claimed that every significant encounter is essentially an opportunity for individuation, a process of becoming who you truly are through integrating your internal polarities. And at this moment, the silence of another can become a gateway to self-discovery. An awakened woman is not one who feels no pain, but one who chooses not to lose herself in it. When she understands his behavior as a reflection of a broader unconscious dynamic, not an exact measure of her worth, she draws strength from the wound and redefines her center of power. She understands that true love begins within and that the other person is merely a mirror, not the source of her completeness. The silence that was once unbearable now becomes an opportunity for inner listening. Instead of asking why he ignores me, the awakened woman asks what this absence is trying to show her about herself. This shift in focus is profound because instead of seeking emotional validation from another, she begins observing her own vulnerabilities, attachment patterns, fantasies of idealized love, and fear of abandonment. By doing so, she starts the healing process. This woman does not try to squeeze out answers or chase someone who pulls away. She understands his silence speaks to an inner process only he can resolve, and she respects it, not as passivity but as an act of love for herself. His withdrawal can paradoxically become the space necessary for her to return to herself, strengthen her identity, and rewrite her emotional stories from a more mature, conscious place. The awakened woman also acknowledges her own shadow. She understands that just as he projects his anima onto her, she may project onto him the absent father, the idealized savior, or the partner who must fill her voids. Bringing these images to consciousness, she ceases to be a hostage of unconscious patterns and begins to choose more clearly and freely. She becomes whole, no longer just half-seeking completion. Transforming silence into awareness requires courage. It is easier to blame another, call him cold, immature, or cowardly. It is harder to look inside oneself and admit how this silence awakens old, still living wounds. But true strength of a woman is born in this confrontation. Not the strength that dominates, manipulates, or imposes, but the strength that embraces, observes, and transforms. The awakened feminine principle is receptive but not passive, sensitive but not so vulnerable as to get lost. It is deep yet knows how to protect itself. It knows when to persist and when to let go. It understands that true love is not about clinging, but about releasing. So even in absence, it does not dissolve but expands. When a woman enters this state of consciousness, she completely changes the relationship dynamics. A man still trapped in his inner conflicts feels this shift and is often influenced by it. Often this silent but confident presence awakens in him a desire to look within, understand what he is losing, and grow. But this is not guaranteed, nor should it be her goal. True transformation happens when she stops living dependent on his reaction and begins living according to her own truth. The awakened woman knows she deserves love that does not silence or confuse her, but she also understands that another's growth process is often slow and that speeding up or leading this journey is beyond her power. Her role is to stay true to herself, care for her soul, grow through her experiences, and wisely choose what deserves her presence. Thus, his silence becomes a teacher, not a punishment, a mirror, not a verdict. And she moves forward not as one who flees pain, but as one who knows pain is part of the path, not its final destination. Love is not just a meeting, it is a revelation. And when he ignores you, even though he loves you, perhaps he is in conflict with parts of himself he doesn't even realize. His silence speaks of an inner universe in chaos, unhealed wounds, and the projected anima confronting him with all he still does not understand about himself. On the other side, you carry the pain of invisibility. But you also have the opportunity to transform this pain into awareness. Jung taught that true unity exists only through integration. He must find his truth and you must find yours. Love blooms only when it stops being escape and becomes presence. And presence begins when you choose to return to yourself. If this content touched something inside you, subscribe to the channel and share this video with those who need to understand these hidden dynamics of love. Leave your comment with the phrase, "I deserve conscious love," and join a community seeking deeper, sincere, and transforming relationships. Click the video appearing on your screen now and continue this journey of self-discovery with us.